Welcome to Ancient Stories in English. This is a channel for people who want to learn English through stories that matter. Today, we ask a question that many Americans still cannot answer. Why can they not forget Vietnam? Now let us begin. On April 21, 2026, the President of the United States said something surprising on television. He was talking about the war in Iran. He was confident. He compared himself to history. World War I, 4 years, World War II, 6 years, Vietnam, 19 years. Then he said, I'm 5 months. And then he said something that made people stop. I would have won Vietnam very quickly. He was not joking. He believed it. Here is something important. During the Vietnam War, this man did not serve. He found 5 reasons to stay home. The last reason said he had a foot problem. Years later, a doctor's daughter said their father wrote that letter as a personal favor, not because it was true. So a man who never fought in Vietnam told the world, on live television in 2026, that he would have won that war quickly. And here is the strangest part. Many Americans agreed with him. This is not new. For 50 years, Americans have been saying the same thing in different words. We could have won, we should have won. Someone prevented us from winning. But the war ended in 1975. That is 50 years ago. So why are they still talking about it? Why does Vietnam stay inside the American mind, like an old wound that never fully heals? To understand that, we need to understand what Vietnam took from America. Not land, not money. Something much harder to replace. Before Vietnam, America had a story about itself. It was a good story, and for a long time, it was true. America entered World War II late, but when it entered, it changed everything. The factories worked day and night, the soldiers crossed oceans, and America won. After the war, America was the strongest country on earth. Its economy was the largest, its military was the most powerful, its technology was the most advanced. Americans had a word for this feeling, invincible. Invincible means impossible to defeat, and America felt invincible. When a problem appeared anywhere in the world, America believed it had the tools to fix it: bombs, money, soldiers, technology. This was not pride without reason. It was confidence built on real experience. America had faced the worst enemies in history and won. So when a small country in Southeast Asia became a problem in the 1960s, America was not worried. The military leaders looked at the numbers. America had B-52 bombers, enormous aircraft that carried 30 tons of bombs each. They flew so high that most weapons could not reach them. America had napalm, powerful chemicals that destroyed forests and crops, electronic sensors, helicopters, ships. Vietnam had rifles, bicycles, and tunnels dug by hand. By every number, every calculation, this was not really a war. It was a problem to be solved quickly. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, sat in his office in Washington and studied the mathematics. How many enemy soldiers died each week? How many bombs were dropped each day? How many missions the planes completed? The numbers said America was winning. But numbers do not always tell the truth. And in Vietnam, the numbers lied. Here is the first English word for today, underestimate. To underestimate means to think something is smaller or weaker than it really is. America underestimated Vietnam. Not the land, not the weather, not the jungle. America underestimated the people. What the generals in Washington did not understand, could not understand, was this. The Vietnamese people had been fighting foreign powers for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. The Chinese came and stayed for 10 centuries. They brought their language, their culture, their system of government. They tried to make Vietnamese people forget who they were. It did not work. The Vietnamese language survived, the customs survived, the identity survived. Then came the Mongols, the largest empire in human history. Fresh from conquering China, Persia, Russia, and Poland, they came to Vietnam 3 times. 3 times, they went home with nothing. Then the Ming Dynasty, then the Qing, then France, for nearly 100 years. Each time, a different empire. Each time, the most powerful force of its age. Each time, the same result. So when Ho Chi Minh stood in Ba Dinh Square on September 2, 1945, and spoke these words, "We would rather sacrifice everything than live in slavery," he was not making a political speech. He was reading history out loud. This was not a country that had learned to fight. This was a country that had never stopped. Here is the second English word, breaking point. The breaking point is the moment when something or someone cannot continue anymore, the moment they give up. General Westmoreland, the American commander in Vietnam, believed that every army has a breaking point. Enough bombs, enough deaths, enough destruction. And eventually, the enemy breaks. It is a reasonable idea. It has worked many times in history. But it only works when the enemy is fighting for something they can afford to lose. America was fighting to stop communism from spreading. That is a political idea. Important, but negotiable. America could lose Vietnam and still exist, still be free, still be America. Vietnam was fighting for something different. They were fighting to not be owned, to not be told what language to speak, what God to worship, what flag to raise. For the Vietnamese people, the cost of losing was not political, it was existential. And you cannot calculate the breaking point of a people who have already decided that death is better than surrender. The bombs fell. 8 million tons, more than all of World War II combined. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, the supply road through the jungle, was bombed every day for years. Every day, young men and women, mostly women, came out after the bombs and filled the holes, repaired the bridges, found new paths through the trees. No machines, no technology, just people with shovels, in the dark. The road never closed. Here is the third English word, disillusionment. Disillusionment is the feeling when you discover that something you believed was not true. It is different from simple disappointment. Disappointment is when things do not go as planned. Disillusionment is when you realize the plan was built on a lie. For Americans at home, the disillusionment came in pieces. First, the body bags. The numbers of dead American soldiers, broadcast on television every night. Young men. 19 years old, 20 years old, coming home in boxes. Then came the photographs, images that the government could not control. A young girl running down a road, her clothes burned away by napalm. A man being shot in the head on a Saigon street, the photographer standing 1 meter away. These images did not match the story the government was telling. The government said, "We are winning, we are protecting freedom, the enemy is almost broken." The photographs said something else. Then came the Pentagon Papers, secret government documents leaked to the press in 1971. The documents showed that the government had known, for years, that the war could not be won. They had sent more soldiers anyway. They had told the public that victory was close, while their own reports said the opposite. The word for this in English is credibility gap, the distance between what the government said and what was actually true. For millions of Americans, this was the moment everything changed. Not just the war, but their trust in their own government. That trust, once broken, does not easily return. Here is the fourth English word, humiliation. Humiliation is not just losing, it is losing in a way that everyone can see. Losing in a way that cannot be hidden or explained away. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. Henry Kissinger, America's chief negotiator, received the Nobel Peace Prize for this agreement. The Vietnamese negotiator Le Duc Tho refused to accept his prize. He said there was no peace yet. He was right. But look at what America had after 10 years of fighting. 58,000 dead soldiers, 8 million tons of bombs dropped. More than $800 billion spent in today's money. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese civilians killed. A generation of American soldiers broken, physically, mentally, forever. And what did America have to show for it? The same border, the same division, The same situation as when they started, except with more graves on both sides. 2 years later, April 30th, 1975, the last American helicopter lifted off the roof of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The images of that helicopter, Americans and Vietnamese climbing desperately to reach it, were broadcast around the world. This was not a withdrawal. This was a collapse. And the whole world watched. But some people did not just watch, they celebrated. In Stockholm, Sweden, thousands of people came into the streets. They carried flags, they sang. A neutral country with no part in the war celebrated the defeat of the most powerful nation on earth. The same scenes appeared in cities across Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Ordinary people, students, workers, families, who had watched America bomb a small country for 10 years, finally saw something they had been waiting for. Not just a Vietnamese victory, a sign that a superpower could be stopped. For America, this was the final wound. It was not enough to lose the war. The world had to celebrate it. In that image, the helicopter on the roof, the crowds in Stockholm, the flags in the streets burned itself into the American memory. This is what humiliation feels like. Not just defeat, but defeat with witnesses. Here's the fifth English word, syndrome. A syndrome is a pattern of problems that appear together, usually after a difficult or painful experience. After Vietnam, American culture developed what historians call the Vietnam syndrome. It is not one thing, it is many things that came together. First, the wound to identity. America had built its modern identity on winning. World War II, the Marshall Plan, the moon landing. America solves problems. America wins. Vietnam said, no, not always. That is a very difficult thing for a powerful nation to accept. So instead of accepting it, many Americans built a different story. We were winning, but the politicians stopped us. The media betrayed us. The protesters at home weakened our soldiers. If we had just used more force, we would have won. This is the story that politicians told in 2026. It is a comfortable story. It removes the need to ask harder questions. Questions like, what were we actually fighting for? Did the Vietnamese people want us there? Was there ever a version of this war that America could have won? Second, the wound to trust. In August 1964, the American government told the public that North Vietnamese ships had attacked U.S. ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. This attack, they said, proved that America needed to go to war. Congress agreed. The bombing began. But the attack was not what the government said it was. Later evidence showed that the second incident, the one that mattered most, very likely never happened at all. The government knew this, and they said nothing. Then came the Pentagon Papers. A secret government study, leaked to the press in 1971, showed that American leaders had been lying to the public for years about the progress of the war, about the reasons for fighting, about whether victory was even possible. This was not a small lie. It was a lie built on top of another lie, and together, they cost 58,000 American lives. After Vietnam, Americans became deeply suspicious of their government's reasons for going to war. So when America went to war in Iraq in 2003, and a senior government official stood before the United Nations holding a small container saying it was evidence of weapons that could kill millions of people, many Americans thought of Vietnam. The container held a white powder. The weapons did not exist. The evidence was false. The syndrome has a long memory. Third, the wound to the soldiers. The men who came back from Vietnam came back to a country that did not know how to receive them. Some were called heroes. Some were called criminals. Most were simply ignored. Many carried invisible wounds, what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They had seen things that could not be unseen, done things that could not be undone, in a war that, by the time they came home, most Americans simply wanted to forget. To forget the war was to forget the soldiers. That wound has never fully healed either. Here is the sixth English word, inspiration. Inspiration is when something gives you the courage or the idea to do something difficult. Vietnam War did not only happen in Vietnam. It happened in living rooms across America, on television screens, in protest marches, in congressional debates, And it happened in the minds of people in other countries who were fighting their own battles against powerful forces. After 1975, leaders of resistance movements around the world said the same thing. We will be the next Vietnam. Afghanistan said it to the Soviet Union in the 1980s, and then to America after 2001. Iraq said it after the American invasion in 2003. Others have said it since. And here is the uncomfortable truth. None of them became Vietnam. Not because they were not brave, not because they did not fight hard, but because Vietnam was not a tactic, not a strategy, not a type of terrain. Vietnam was the result of 1,000 years of a specific history, a specific people, a specific relationship between a nation and the idea of its own survival. You cannot copy that. You can copy the tunnels. You can copy the guerrilla tactics. You can copy the words. But you cannot copy 1,000 years. So, why are Americans obsessed with Vietnam? Because Vietnam took something from them that they have never been able to get back. Not a war, not a territory. Not even 58,000 lives, as devastating as that is. Vietnam took the story. The story that said, America always wins. America always does the right thing. American power can solve any problem. That story ended on April 30th, 1975. And in the 50 years since, some Americans have been trying to rewrite it. We could have won. We should have won. Next time will be different. But the lesson of Vietnam is not about winning or losing. It is about something older. Something that was already written, long before the first American soldier set foot in Southeast Asia. A people who have decided that freedom is worth everything cannot be defeated by a people who are only fighting because their government told them to. That is not a military lesson. That is a human one. And it does not matter how many bombs you have. Thank you for listening to Ancient Stories in English. Today's words: invincible, underestimate, breaking point, disillusionment, humiliation, syndrome, inspiration. Say them slowly, use them in a sentence, and remember the stories behind them. See you next time.